Welcome to the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast. My name is Katie Dodd, and I'm a nutrition entrepreneur. I spent 7 years as a side hustler before diving into entrepreneurship full time. Before making the leap, I was bringing in 6 figures through my side hustle. If I can do it, you can too. This podcast is for dietitians, interns, and students who want to be inspired to start or perfect the side hustle of their dreams. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the 230th episode of the Dietitian Side Hustle podcast, Positive Intelligence Part 2. Now, at the time of recording this, I am sick. Bugs have been going around my house. My poor son was sick, missed an entire week of school. Then my daughter got sick, and then a few days ago I got sick, and I almost didn't record this episode. It's Tuesday night. This episode drops Wednesday morning. And like I said, I almost didn't record it, but I felt like this window of okay, I can do hard things. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I have my video turned off because I look how I feel. So anyways, I'm going to do my best with this episode. It is part 2 of a 3-part series on positive intelligence. So if you listened to last week's episode 229, I really introduced what is positive intelligence and why I'm pretty darn obsessed with it. And today I want to talk to you guys more about saboteurs. And even if you don't have time to listen to last week's episode, don't worry. I'm going to give you a quick recap, and then we're going to kind of dive more into the judge, the saboteurs, and I guess most importantly about how knowledge of this can benefit us really in all areas of life. And all that to say, keep in mind that I am not feeling good. So if I sound a little off, if I start coughing later, or if I just don't make sense, please have grace with me because like I said, I wasn't planning to record this. I was thinking okay, this will just be a late episode, but we're here. So, again, last week on the podcast, I talked about kind of like the 101 of positive intelligence. What is it? And Positive Intelligence is a book written by Shirzad Chamine, and he has a whole amazing program that he does related to positive intelligence. And in a nutshell, what positive intelligence is it's a measure of really the strength of your brain being a friend to you or being an enemy to you. So we have kind of like these positive and negative voices in our head, and which one has more weight? Is it more that positive side of your brain? They call it, in the positive intelligence world, they call it your sage, and that is where your, brain is acting more like a friend than an enemy. Or is really that enemy, those saboteurs really taking you over, and just like your self-talk is really low, meaning you have that low positive intelligence. So in the positive intelligence world, in a nutshell, it is just an indicator of control, the control you have over your own mind. And they do have the PQ score, which stands for the positive intelligence score, which is a percentage score from 0 to 100. You could do assessments to figure out what they are. But again, I talked about that last week. So hopefully this was just a recap so you're on the same page. So I want to talk today more about that negative voice. And next week, hopefully I'll be feeling much better by the time I record the next episode. We'll be talking more about how to strengthen that positive voice. So let's first talk about the saboteurs. And I guess I'll kind of, actually I'll just list them again. I listed them on the last episode, but we're going to talk in more detail about them today. So when it comes to the saboteur, again, that's that negative part of your brain. That is the part of your brain that's acting more like an enemy than a friend. We all have a judge. Think of the judge as the master saboteur. Everyone has it, and it compels us to find faults in ourselves and others in situations and circumstances. So there's no getting away from it. We all have this judge. It doesn't matter how positive you are, everyone has it. And then we all have a saboteur, which is kind of like an accomplice to the judge. So there are 9 saboteurs: the avoider or the controller, hyperachiever, hyperrational, hypervigilant, pleaser, restless, stickler, and victim. And positive intelligence, they do have on their website these assessments you can take and figure out what are my saboteurs? And we'll be talking about this through the episode, but one of the best things about learning your saboteurs is that you can kind of predict what is going to get in your way. You could look back historically and see oh man, that's why I was getting my own way. That's why I stopped. That's why I failed. That's why I didn't have success. I was self-sabotaging, not on purpose, but I was. And So it's going to give us some knowledge, but then also hopefully some strength moving forward to recognize like, okay, I see this now, but now with the awareness that I have, I'm going to work on weakening my saboteurs and strengthening that sage, that positive side of my brain. So that way, when I do the thing again in my business and my side hustle, whatever it is, I will have success. And I know I said this in the last episode, but one of the things I love so much about positive intelligence is that it gives names to the saboteurs. I've always said, like, oh, there's this mean voice in our head that says mean things. That is true. But we all have a different narrative in our head based on who we are, how we grew up, all kinds of things. And it's really cool to actually give a name to it and to understand how we as individuals can get in our own ways and hold ourselves back, and to understand there are tools we can have to overcome these things. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the judge first, and then we'll talk about the saboteurs. So the concept of positive intelligence, again, you could read the book, but I did go through a program this summer, and I've got my little notebook full of all kinds of notes, and it's something that I'm continuing to become, I wouldn't say an expert in yet, but I am a student of positive intelligence. But every day we are actively sabotaging ourselves. Most of it is unintentional in all different areas of life. It could be in our own wellness, in our performance, in our job, in our business, in our relationships. Now, I do want to say that when it comes to the judge that we all have and these saboteurs, at their root, they're not a bad thing. It's kind of like emotions. There's no bad emotion. It's data. It's data and information for us. So in the positive intelligence world, they give this analogy, which I really like, and they talk about putting your hand on a hot stove. If you touch a hot stove, well, hey, that's an alert. Hey, stove is hot. You better move your hand or else it's going to burn. So that's what a saboteur is. They're alerts. They're giving you data. They're saying, hey, hot stove, let's take some action. Where we fall into trouble is if we keep our hand on the stove. If we feel these negative emotions, if we stay stuck in the saboteur beliefs and we just stew in it, if we stay there longer for a second, if we stay there longer than just using it for data, and we just stew in it and sit in it, that's when we get into trouble. That is leaving your hand on the stove. Now, to reiterate, the judge focuses on what is wrong with you, what's wrong with ourselves, what's wrong with others, what's wrong with the situations we're in, the circumstances that we're dealt, and it makes you feel bad about it. And it makes you feel like you have no control. And we know that our brains amplify and remember the negative way more than the positive, which is kind of unfortunate, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our brains really remembered the positive things in life and then just like kind of like, oh, we forget those negative things, but our brains are just hardwired to amplify and remember the negative. So when it comes to, and again, I'm just kind of reading my notes and my brain's feeling a little fuzzy right now, but I want to make sure I do this justice. But, um, oh gosh, my brain, my poor brain. It's not being, positive intelligence brain, but I'm just a sick brain over here. But one of the things about the judge is it can make accurate and inaccurate observations. Not everything that voice in your head says is true. And I will say, when it comes to our limiting beliefs, most of the time your brain is lying to you. Your brain is saying, like, oh, I can't do this. But the thing about our beliefs is they become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We believe the thoughts that we have. And I'm not, again, an expert in this stuff, but they talked about this concept of mirror neurons and how we match energy and emotions and how we fuel each other, and even just how our thoughts fuel us. And it's just, the more we are in the saboteurs, the more we keep our hand on the stove. It's like it kind of takes over everything, and everything can become this negative. And I know I shared this in the last episode, but that's one of the things I love about positive intelligence is as we work on these things, it improves all areas of our life. So that was me butchering that. And here's another thing too that positive intelligence talks about, because as we're going to be talking about the judge and more specifically the saboteurs, you might be like, okay, that's great. What do I do about it? We'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but one of the most important things you could do is what they call catching the judge or catching the saboteurs. When you have a thought pattern and you're like, wait a minute, You break out of the autopilot of just going through life, just believing these lies that your brain's telling you. You break out of autopilot and you actually say, that's my judge or that's my saboteur. It goes a long way to recognize that it's not just you sucking, it's not just the circumstances sucking. That is a belief that you're having that might not be accurate. So, one of the best things we could do is become aware of what our saboteurs are and catch it and even give a name to it. And I'm going to go over what my saboteurs are because I mentioned on the last episode, I'm like, oh, I've taken these assessments. I want to show you guys, what mine are. So let me pull up my little app. When you join their program, there's actually an app that they have. So my saboteur assessments, I took the saboteur assessment twice. I took it once this last June, and then I read the book and I really learned more about it. And then I took the assessment again right when I started doing a program, a free program at the time, through the positive intelligence world. And I haven't retaken it since, but my results shifted just a little bit. But when it comes to the assessments, I mentioned there are 9 saboteurs. You get a score for all of them. It's a score of 0 to 10. And it ranks like which saboteurs are your highest. I did have quite a few saboteurs that are similar in, how do I say this? Similar in strength, the same number. But this time that I did it compared to the first time, it was a little bit more clear. But let me just share my results. So for pleaser, this is really that people pleaser. You want people to like you. I did score a 10 out of 10. There was no wiggle room, and I wasn't surprised. I could have just, I could have told you that without even taking the assessment. The next one was actually the avoider. The avoider I scored an 8 out of 10. The next 2 I tied. It was hyperachiever at a 6 and hypervigilant also at a 6. And when looking at my top 3, I looked at the hyperachiever and hypervigilant. With the stage of life I was in, I just identified a little bit more with hypervigilant, although hyperachiever is high. Let's not get that twisted. For stickler, which is the perfectionist, I scored a 5. For restless, I scored 2. For victim, I scored 2. For hyper-rational, I scored 1. And for controller, I scored 0. So it was kind of cool to see just how I ranked in all of these. And it's kind of funny because I have a good friend who I'm in a mastermind with, and we were together the day we first did these assessments. This was in June of 2024. And we were at the Wyndham Grand Clearwater Beach. And right after we did these assessments, we went to lunch and we were kind of comparing notes. We went down to these like chairs they have on the beach that you could lounge in, not chairs, but loungers. And I remember being there with my friend and we were going over our results. And it was so funny because we're good friends, but we are opposites. When it came to controller, I scored 0, lowest one. And she was like, that was her highest one, was controller. For me, pleaser, I scored, that was my top one. Pleaser was her lowest. And it was just kind of funny to see how uh, sometimes opposites attract, right? Sometimes we attract who we are, but also opposites. So, anyways, those are my scores for my saboteurs. So, I'm going to pull up next. Let me see. Oh, there's one other thing I want to say about the saboteurs, because you might hear me talk about them and you're like, well, why is that a bad thing, Katie? Like, is it really a bad thing to want to achieve a lot? Is it really a bad thing to be vigilant? Is it really a bad thing to make people happy? And the thing about saboteurs is they're not in themselves bad, but saboteurs are overused strengths. So even when I read those to you guys, they're my saboteurs that get in the way and they hold me back, but also those are some of the best things about me. Being a people pleaser. I really care about what other people think. I truly care about you guys. I don't know how avoider is helpful. Well, I guess avoider. So avoider could be where I want to avoid hard conversations or hard situations because I want to make people happy. Innately in itself, well, that's not a bad thing. I want to keep the peace. I don't want to rock the boat. Hyperachiever, I want to have success. And of course, as an entrepreneur, I want to have success. In itself, is that a bad thing? No. And that's one of my strengths is I care about people. I achieve a lot, even the perfectionist. To a degree, which again is the stickler, to a degree, there's a good piece of that, right? I care about the work that I do. So our saboteurs are overused strengths. And so it's more about like, oh gosh, my brain just went blank. But I hope that makes sense. I'm going to pull up some notes actually. on my computer, and I know you guys can't see me, but I wanted to pull up some stuff on, oh golly, I think I closed my tabs. There we go. So I wanted to pull up some stuff to share a little bit more about these saboteurs with you guys. Now, I mentioned this thing about how you might be like, well, gosh, saboteurs aren't that bad. But I think one lie we have is we think that, oh, a saboteur is not necessarily a bad thing. But the truth of the matter is saboteurs, they sabotage us. They get in our way. They hold us back. But we look at it as like, oh, that's a strength. And your brain even will tell you like, oh, no, I'm your friend. You need me. You need this negative thing, and it keeps you stuck. There's a lot of psychology and research behind positive intelligence, which is actually really cool. But without going too deep into it, some of the origins of saboteurs is like the strengths that we are naturally born with. And then over time, we start maybe overusing or even abusing these wonderful strengths. And then we suddenly become trapped with them, right? We become trapped in something that is holding us back. So I'm going to go over all of the saboteurs, not just the judge, but the saboteurs. And I know I shared this briefly yesterday, but I want to talk more about them. So we're going to go through all 9 of them, first starting with the avoider. And as I talk about these, I want you to think about yourself. Do you see yourself in any of these saboteurs? If you're like, oh yeah, I totally get in my own way with that. Or even thinking of other people, colleagues, coworkers, friends, family, you might be able to see these in them and be like, oh, they're not trying to be a pain in the butt. Their saboteurs just getting in the way. That voice in their head is getting in their own way. So the avoider is focusing on the positive and pleasant in an extreme way, avoiding difficult tasks and conflicts. So the document that I'm looking at is kind of cool. It talks about some of the original survival functions because, again, we started out with these strengths and then they kind of twisted over time. And with the avoider, the origin survival function is that the avoider could rise from both happy and difficult childhoods. In a happy childhood, one might not have learned the resiliency of dealing with difficult emotions. In a childhood with high conflict and tension, the avoider might come in to play peacemaker and learn not to add any negativity or tension on top of one's existing family tensions. And so when I think back on my childhood, because again, the avoider is my number one, or is it my number one? It's my number 2. Pleaser's my number 1. So avoider is really high for me, but I think for me, I think I had a pretty happy childhood, and I think I didn't really have to deal with difficult emotions. And so, now as this adult, I'm like, no, let's just everyone get along, right? So characteristics of the avoider is that they avoid conflict and say yes to things one wouldn't want. They downplay the importance of real problems and tries to deflect others. They have a difficult time saying no, resists others through passive aggressive means rather than directly, loses self in comforting routines and habits, and procrastinates on unpleasant tasks. And I can tell you guys that being an avoider has gotten me into some trouble in multiple areas of my life because as we read that, we could hear like, okay, yeah, I can see how this is a problem. So some of the lies that the avoider tells himself is that, you're a good person to spare other people's feelings. No good comes out of conflict, and it's good to be flexible, and someone needs to be a peacemaker because our saboteurs, they want to keep us stuck. They want us to keep our hands on the stove. So they're going to tell us these lies about, no, this is a good thing. You need me. Don't get rid of me. And so that is the avoider. And I will say some areas of strength about these as well, because no one wants to feel like, oh man, do I just suck? No, none of you suck. I promise you that. Again, saboteurs are strengths to the extreme, taken too far. And some of the strengths of the avoider is that they seek peace and harmony, both inside and out. They might be easygoing, even keeled, flexible, adaptable, and they tend to be positive and relatively non-judgmental of others. And that's me too, right? And if you guys listen to the podcast, you guys have a pretty good idea of who I am, and that's absolutely me. So let's talk about the controller. Now this is not me. The controller for me, I was a 0 on my scores. And again, there's no good or bad saboteur, right? my very good friend ranks very high in controller. So there's strengths to all of these, but again, they're just to the extreme and hold us back. So the controller is anxiety-based need to take charge and control of situations and people's actions to one's own will. High anxiety and impatience when it's not possible. So kind of where this might have come from, if this is something that you're like, oh yeah, that's me. I gotta be in control. I am a control freak. This could be sometimes underneath this hidden fear of being controlled by others. The controller is sometimes associated with early life experience where the child's forced to grow up fast, to be on their own, to take charge of its chaotic and dangerous surroundings in order to physically survive or survive emotionally. It's also associated with being hurt, rejected, betrayed, or deciding that I am never going to be vulnerable again. So, some of the characteristics of a controller is that strong energy and the need to control and take charge, connecting with others through competition, challenge, physicality, or conflict rather than softer emotions. Maybe more willful, confrontational, a straight talker, pushing people beyond their comfort zones and coming alive when doing impossible and beating the odds. So, one of the lies that the controller will tell someone of like, no, you need me, is that without the controller you can't get much done. You need to push people. If you don't control, you will be controlled, and you can't live with that. And that you're trying to get the job done for all of our sakes, right? So let's talk about some of the strengths, though, of the controller. Confidence, right? Action oriented, decisive, willful, persistent. They challenge themselves and others. They're able to do the right thing, even if it's unpopular, and they see possibilities where others might not see possibilities. So, next, let's talk about the hyperachiever. For me, I tied on number three for hyperachiever. So, this is someone who's dependent on constant performance and achievement for self respect and self validation. Focused on external validation, attention, and acceptance from others leads to unsustainable workaholic tendencies and loss of touch with deeper emotional and relational needs. So, this is the person who is go, 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 do, do, do. And I will say, I do see a lot of dietitians fall into this, especially the side hustler, because we are doing lots of things, right? So, some of the origins of hyperachiever, it often, just one second. I hear my daughter yelling for me. I hear my daughter yelling for my son. I'm going to pause this episode. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I push pause. I've never actually push pause while recording an episode. Those who listen to the podcast know that I don't edit. So, anyways, for those curious, we had a slime emergency in my house. My daughter My daughter's 9. We love slime. I love slime. If you're in the Blog Boss Mastermind, I actually give my students slime. It's a thing. Adult slime. I could have a whole podcast episode about slime. I think at our last Blog Boss Mastermind in Medford, Oregon, I think I gave like a full master class in slime, but that's for another day. So anyways, I go out in the living room and my daughter's sitting there, hands full of overactivated slime, which means it's really, really sticky. So she's covered in slime. She's got stuff on her. She can't get up. It's spilled on her new shirt. And she's like, so I'm like, slime emergency. Let me pause the podcast. So anyways, I got everything picked up, cleaned off her shirt, and she is washing her hands. And here I am back. Oh goodness. Okay, so we were talking about the hyperachiever, and I don't think I started talking about like where it comes from. Um, but this is essentially just like that kiddo who seeks approval from achieving, obeying the rules, having good manners. They feel like this is how I get love, is by achieving, by doing, right? So some of the characteristics of the hyperachiever is, competitive, image and status conscious. They're good at covering up insecurities and showing a positive self-image. They adapt their personality to fit in. Or to fit what would be most impressive to others. They're very goal-oriented, workaholic, more into perfecting public image than introspection, and can be self-promoting and can also keep people at a safe distance. Now, some of the lies the hyperachiever says when it's like, you got to hold on to me, you need to achieve in order to have love, is that life is about achieving and producing results. And portraying a good image helps me to achieve results. And feelings are just a distraction and don't help anything. Now, let's talk about some of the strengths, because if you're like, oh my gosh, that's me, but it sounds so horrible, it's okay. We're all in the same boat. And honestly, hyperachiever is me. Strengths of this is being driven and pragmatic, adaptable, goal-oriented, self-directed, capable of growing self and others to achieve full potential. When inner-directed, it can be great at inspiring self and others towards a meaningful growth and achievement. So next we have hyper-rational, and I feel like this one I scored low, right? Yeah, I scored like 1 out of 10. So hyper-rational is an intense and exclusive focus on the rational processing of everything, including relationships. It can be perceived as cold, distant, and intellectually arrogant. Some of the origins of hyper-rational is being like a good survival strategy during early childhood. Circumstances of emotional turmoil or chaotic surroundings. So, escaping into the neat, orderly, rational mind generates a sense of security or a sense of even intellectual superiority. And it also can help someone to gain attention and praise by showing up and being that smartest person in the room. Some of the characteristics of hyperrational include an intense and active mind, sometimes coming across as intellectually arrogant or secretive, being private, not letting many people into deeper feelings, mostly showing feelings through passion and ideas, preferring to watch the craziness around them and then analyzing it from a distance, losing track of time due to intense concentration, also being skeptical, and yeah. The lies that the hyper-rational saboteur has is that the rational mind is the most important thing and that it should be protected from wasteful intrusion of people's messy emotions and needs so it can get the work done. But the strengths of the hyper-rational person is being capable of deep insight and understanding through objective analysis, being observant and perspective, and power of great mental concentration, being driven towards great expertise in a knowledge area, and also can be a great innovator, right? So next we have hypervigilant. So for me, this is my number 3, although number 3 again is tied with hyper achiever. So hypervigilant is continuous, intense anxiety about all the dangers of what could go wrong, a vigilance that can never rest. So where this can come from is from early experiences where the source of safety and security, sometimes with a parental figure, especially in little kiddos, right, was unpredictable or unreliable. It could also result when a painful, unexpected event proved to be life-threatening or unreliable. So some characteristics of this is always anxious, with chronic doubts about self and others, extraordinarily being extraordinarily sensitive to danger signals, constant expectation of mishap or danger, suspicious of what others are up to. People mess up. They might seek reassurance and guidance in procedures, rules, authorities, and institutions. So the justification that the hypervigilant saboteur has is that life is full of dangers. If I don't look out for them, who will, right? You need me to stay safe. But some of the strengths of being hypervigilant is, well, vigilance, right? That in itself is a strength, right? Being sensitive and aware of risks and dangers of self, of others, of situations, being good guardians of family, communities, being loyal, reliable, dependable, hard worker, and just really persevering when things are tough. So next, I'm just realizing I mentioned I have a cold. I'm like, this is a long episode. I am talking a lot, but I hope this is helpful, you guys. This is helpful to go through all these saboteurs, because for me, again, I find it to be so fascinating, but I'm going to keep going. But man, I could use some water. I have no water. Like in these moments, I'm like, I should keep water bottles at my desk. Could always pause again. Okay, so the pleaser. This is my number 1. The pleaser indirectly tries to gain acceptance and affection by helping, pleasing, rescuing, or flattering others, loses sight of own needs, and becomes resentful as a result. So some of like where this might have come from is the pleaser tries to earn attention and acceptance through helping others. This is an indirect attempt to have one's emotional needs met. It's fed by a few original assumptions that could be picked up in childhood. Number one, putting others' needs ahead of your own. Number two, if I ask for my own needs, then I might drive others away. Number three, I've got to give lots of love and affection in order to get any back. Or number four, I must earn it and I'm not simply worthy of it. Ouch. Yeah. I'm just saying ouch because this is my number one. I'm like, oh, golly. But I will say, I am always on this journey to recognize where I'm at, where I've been, and continue to grow. And I think for all of us as humans, right, there's a lot of things inside of us that we can look at and be like, oh, that's not very good. But that's just being human, right? And it's about being aware, feeling that hot stove, and not keeping our hand on it, right? So, characteristics of the pleaser has a strong need to be liked by people and attempts to earn it by helping, pleasing, rescuing, or flattering, needs frequent reassurance by others about their acceptance and affection, can't express their own needs openly and directly, does so indirectly by having people feel obligated to reciprocate care, may come across as needy, can be too forceful or intrusive in trying to help others. Some of the justifications of why the saboteur says, you need me, is that I don't do this for myself. I'm simply helping others selflessly, and I don't expect anything in return, and the world would be a better place if everyone did the same. Now, let's talk about some of the strengths, though. A strength of a pleaser is empathy, right? They're empathetic, they're loving, they're giving, they're in tune to the feelings of others. And themselves, well, more others actually, more in tune to the feelings of others and their needs. They're emotionally self aware and have a potential for high emotional intelligence. That's good, right? Can I get your reassurance that there's nothing wrong with being a pleaser? Oh, golly. Okay, so next we have restless. This is one that I scored relatively low on. I think I scored 2 on this one. So restless is constantly in search of greater excitement or the next activity or constant busyness, rarely at peace or content with the current activity. Restlessness can be a strategy to escape from dealing with fears, anxieties, and painful feelings. And as I'm reading this, I will say I can look back at my life and see seasons where some of these saboteurs were stronger than others. Because I think for a hot minute, restless was a very strong one for me. So, where restless comes from, it's a strategy to find constant new sources of excitement, pleasure, and it could be associated in early life with inadequate parental nurturing or painful circumstances. Restless indulgence not only provided a substitute for self nurturing, but also an escape with having to deal with anxiety and pain and hard things. So, characteristics of the restless saboteur is easily distracted, can always get scattered, staying busy, juggling many different tasks and plans. I often see this in like the side hustle hopper, right? You're just never satisfied in one thing. You're like, oh, okay, I'm going to try the next thing. Oh, I'm going to go on to the next thing. Sees excitement and variety. Not in comfort and safety. They bounce from unpleasant feelings very quickly and always is seeking new stimulation. Some of the lies that the restless saboteur tells us is that life is too short and must be lived fully, and I don't want to miss out. Spending any time on unpleasant feelings is a waste of life, and I should divert my attention. Now, some of the strengths of the restless is high energy and vitality, being open, curious, spontaneous, contagious enthusiasm and appreciation of life, capable of great productivity and creativity, energizing and engaging others in co creation, and capable of great breadth of activities and pursuits. Often, a restless person can be a fun person. So, next we have the stickler, which is also known as the perfectionist, which, again, many of you listening probably really identify with this one. I score, again, high in this one, but I actually thought it would be higher. But I think I've done so much work on myself in the area of perfectionism that I'm a 5 out of 10 on it now. So, a stickler is perfectionism or a need for order and organization taken too far. So, where it really comes from is that the stickler's a way of quieting that constant voice of self judgment and fear of others' judgments through trying to be perfect, right? If you do what's right, you'll you'll go beyond interference and reproach by others. Perfectionism and order bring a sense of temporary relief. And it might have generated a sense of order in the middle of maybe a chaotic family dynamic, or earned acceptance and attention from emotionally distant or demanding parents by standing out as this, perfect child. So some of the characteristics of the stickler is punctual, methodical, perfectionist, can be irritable, tense, opinionated, and sarcastic, highly critical of self and others, strong need for self-control and self-restraint, works overtime to make up for other sloppiness and laziness, and highly sensitive to criticism. So, where the stickler lies to us on why we need it is that this is a personal obligation. It's up to me to fix whatever mess I encounter. Perfectionism is good. Plus, it makes me feel better about myself. And there's usually a clear right and wrong way to do things. And I know how things should be done and must do it right. Now, some of the strengths of the stickler is high standards and ideals, very principled, able to bring that organization and order into ambiguity and chaos, capable of leading self and others to live and work based on clear guidelines and principles, being a good person, doing the right things, being self-disciplined, and seeing and communicating things as they are. So, our next saboteur is the victim. The victim is emotional and temperamental as a way to gain attention and affection, and extreme focus on internal feelings, particularly painful ones. Martyr streak. For this, I did score 2, so I'm relatively low on this one. I actually think the first time I did this assessment, I was a 0 also on victim, but the next time I did the assessment, apparently I had 2 points there. So where the victim comes from is it's often associated with childhood experiences of not being seen or accepted, and coming to believe that something's especially wrong with you. Victim is a strategy to squeeze out affection from those who would otherwise not be paying attention, and the moods mimic a false sense of aliveness. So some of the characteristics of the victim includes if criticized or misunderstood, they tend to withdraw, pout, and sulk. Fairly dramatic and temperamental. When things get tough, they want to crumble and give up. Repressed rage results in depression, apathy, and constant fatigue. Unconsciously attached to having difficulties. Gets attention by having emotional problems or being temperamental or sullen. Now, some of the lies that the victim will say is that maybe this way I get some of the love and attention that I actually deserve. Sadness is noble, and it's a thing that shows exceptional depth, insight, and sensitivity. But some of the strengths of the victim, because there are strengths, it's being sensitive, right? Feeling own emotional needs deeply and clearly, including difficult emotions, being introspective and individualistic, being able to really perceive those nuances of inner workings in our mind, and capable of connecting, teaching, inspiring, and healing others. So those are all of the saboteurs. And I hope that as I read those, that you were able to figure out, like, okay, yeah, I feel like that's me. I feel like that's me. Now, I would encourage you guys to, and I know I said this before, but I encourage you to go get the book Positive Intelligence. If you go to katiedodd.com, that's my Linktree page. You can click on Amazon storefront. And in my Amazon storefront, I have all of my favorite books for entrepreneurs, and in there you will find Positive Intelligence. So I would encourage you guys to read the book because it is so good. But I also want to encourage you guys to do the assessment. So I'm Googling right now. Positive Intelligence Saboteur. How do you spell saboteur? Saboteur assessment. I'm just going to Google this, and I feel like if you Google positive intelligence saboteur assessment, the very first thing that comes up is going to be take the saboteur assessment. And it's going to be really valuable to go through and take this assessment and figure out, how do you rank for all 9 of these saboteurs? We all have the judge, but what are the saboteurs? What are the ones that are strongest for you? And it's going to give you some awareness to look back and be like, okay, this makes sense on why I am the way I am, and how my self-talk is, and why I behave in certain ways. And, I know for me, before positive intelligence, I might beat myself up when I would procrastinate. Like, what is wrong with me? Why am I procrastinating? But now I catch the saboteur. That's my avoider. It's not me innately being someone who's sucky. This is strengths taken to the extreme, and it is something that gets in my own way. So I want to encourage all of you to figure out, what are your saboteurs? You could do this just by listening to this episode and kind of self-identifying or taking the assessment. And once you figure out what they are, read a little bit more about them, get a little bit more familiar. And then as you go throughout your day, as you go throughout your week, I want you to catch that saboteur. If you find yourself thinking a certain way or acting a certain way or beating yourself up, right? It's that the positive intelligence. It's how much is your brain being a friend or an enemy, and your brain is not being very nice to you. Really taking a step back to realize, like, wait a minute, wait 1 minute. That's my saboteur. That's not me. So I hope this episode was helpful. In our next and final episode of this 3-part series on positive intelligence, I'm going to be talking more about the sage, and that is that friend part of your brain, right? Like, yes, let's identify the saboteurs. This is so important, but then let's work on building up your brain, working on having that balance and improving your self-talk and just working from the inside out, so that way you could have more success in all areas of your life, including your side hustle. So thanks for hanging in there with me through this, I think, 40-minute episode as I'm sick. I don't feel good. My brain's not working good. Slime emergencies, all the things. I hope that I hope that you guys are still getting value out of this episode. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening to the podcast. And as always, go to katiedodd.com to learn more about all the ways that we can work together. And I'll see you guys next week, hopefully with more pep in my step for our final series in the Positive Intelligence podcast series. Okay, my brain's done. We're done. Okay, bye, friends.